Hello. When using doors and access control systems, there are several typical tasks. The first is to restrict access to the premises. The second is to record employee passages. The third is to monitor the closing of the door after passage and its possible retention in an open state. The fourth point is to monitor the locking of the lock to prevent sabotage or detect malfunctions. Access restriction is simply achieved by installing a controlled lock, and the next 3 points, which require feedback from the door, will be discussed in this video. The door opening sensor and hall sensor help to monitor the facility situation. For example, by recording actual employee passages or promptly notifying about various emergency situations at access points for their timely resolution. Magnetic contact sensors, gyroscopes, are used to track the position of doors. They can be surface mounted or recessed, standard or vandal resistant, for non-magnetic or steel doors. The so-called gherkin physically consists of 2 different parts. The first is a housing with a permanent magnet, which is installed immovably on the door frame. The second part is the housing with the gyroscope, a hermetically sealed glass cylinder inside which are 2 magnetically controlled contacts. It is installed opposite the first part on the door leaf. When the door closes, the magnet comes close to the gherkin. When a certain distance between them is reached, the contacts of the geophone close by the magnetic field. When opened, everything happens in reverse order. The magnet is removed from the gyroscope, and the contacts open. Based on the information received from the sensor, the controller can record a specific set of events. Let's examine each one in order. Granting or denying access occurs immediately after presenting the card at a closed door. Passage registration occurs when a person passes through the door within a specified time after presenting their card. Timeout expiration occurs when presenting the card and unlocking the door with the controller. The door does not open. Break-in, when a door is opened without a command from the controller. Door holding, when the door remains open longer than the time set in the configuration. And passage, the door open happens if the card is presented while the door is open. Gear con connects to the terminals of the controller, the names of which depend on its model. All terminal blocks of the controllers are labeled. In the case of E4 controllers for opening sensors, pass terminals are typically used. For any other model, information can be found in the instructions on our official website in the service documentation section. As an example, we will connect a reed switch to the E4 controller according to its instructions. I already have a lock on my desk that is prepared and connected with a built-in reed switch and a hall sensor. Since the reed switch is generally a normally closed magnetic contact sensor, it has 2 wires for connection. In our case, these are gray and brown. We will connect them to the PS and G&D terminals of the controller's discrete input port. Next, in the access point settings, we will add information about the established connection. To do this, in the Client program, on the Equipment tab, we will select the desired access point and go to its settings. In the passage sensor field, we will specify the used terminal and the normal state of the sensor. In other words, the state for the reed switch when the door is closed. Typically, this is normally closed. Click OK to save the settings. I would like to note that if you have connected all devices to the access point according to the prepared diagram from the documentation, you can simplify the controller settings by selecting one of the ready-made configurations. For example, 2 doors for potential control. After connecting and configuring, we have access to the entire basic set of sensor functions. Let's add an additional function, door hold detection. To do this, we will disable the Show Only Basic Settings option in the settings. And using slider time until door hold signal, we'll select desired interval. Additionally, we will use Signal Other Situations function in settings of the reader's indicators. Now, if the sensor does not return to its normal state after the door is opened within a specified period, the controller will log a door holding event and will signal this through the indicators of the connected readers. If necessary, various responses can be configured for this event, such as notifying security. An additional Sigur license is required for this. Next, we will look at the connection, setup, and functionality of the hollow sensor. It is activated when 2 conditions are met simultaneously. Power is supplied to the lock and the armature is secured to the lock. If the gherkin helps determine the position of the door in space, then the hollow sensor is designed to monitor the physical state of the lock and, consequently, the actual state of the door, whether it is closed or open. The hollow sensor is connected to the Sigur controller via a free discrete input. Typically, the output of such a sensor includes a relay that closes or opens depending on the presence or absence of magnetism from the lot. Let's proceed with the connection. In this lock model, the green and white wires are responsible for the hollow sensor. We will connect them to the RT and G&D terminals of the controller port. Now we will make the necessary settings. For this, we return to the Client program on the Equipment tab. Select the desired network access point and go to its settings. Please uncheck the box Show only the basic settings option. Next, we find the function hall sensor. We specify the terminal to which the hall sensor is physically connected and its normal state. The normal state can typically vary depending on the specific model and configuration of the particular lock device. In our case, the hall sensor is normally open. Now, if the power to the lock is turned off or the physical contact to the coil with the armature is broken while the door is closed, the reed switch will remain silent, whereas the hall sensor will change its state, immediately notifying the system of the lock's unlocking. Let's consider this example in practice. We connected the lock through a laboratory power supply. Let's start reducing the power level of the lock. As soon as the power level of the lock dropped to a minimum and it was unlocked, the output of the hall sensor changed its state and reported this to the controller. We also see the corresponding event on the real-time monitoring tab. Thus, in areas where maximum control of the door is important, additional problematic situations can be monitored. For example, failures of power supply units, breaks in the wires supplying the lock, force breaches of doors, as well as sticking contacts of the relay when the controller no longer supplies power to the lock, but it remains in a locked state. Note that the hall sensor is not a substitute for a door opening sensor because it transmits the actual state of the lock to the controller, while it indicates the position of the door leaf. Let's consider the behavior of the system. When installer connected hall sensor instead of reed switch, a person came to the door and held their card up to reader. The controller granted access and unlocked the lock by cutting off its power. The hall sensor immediately triggered, even though no one opened the door, and the door leaf remained in place. The controller recorded the passage, even though the person had not yet gone through the door and might not go through if they changed their mind or hesitated. The system received an erroneous response to events. In the Sigur controllers, the settings allow you to specify when to lock the lock, either when the door is opened or when it is closed, which is determined by the reed switch. If a hall sensor is used instead of a reed switch, we get two options, both of which are incorrect. Either after the first unlocking of the lock, it never locks again and the door remains open, or after unlocking the lock, it immediately closes before a person has a chance to open the door. Use lock and door sensors wisely. That's all from me. Until we meet again.